Fall of Giants begins in 1911. There's a prologue in 1911. The real story begins in 1914 and covers 10 years. The second book will cover the Second World War, and the third book in the trilogy will cover the Cold War. Fall of Giants is about 5 families. One American, one Russian, one German, and 2 British families. And it's about their destiny, and it's about them falling in love and getting married and going to war and making money and losing money, all the things that novels are always about. But it's also about their experience of the great events of the first part of the 20th century. So the people in Fall of Giants live through the First World War and the Russian Revolution and the aftermath of those events in the early 1920s. So it's not a history book, it's a novel, and it's about individuals and their passions, but it's also about their experience of history. It's about them living through great historical events. I didn't want to take any liberties with history. I wanted this, insofar as I say what happened on the world stage, in war, on battlefields, in parliaments, that's all true. That's exactly how it happened. And the way I do that is I put a fictional character in the room. So one of the people who we're reading about, one of the young men or one of the young women, is there on the scene at some real event. And finally, when I had done all my own reading, I hired actually 8 history professors to read the typescript and correct it. And so I hope with all that there should be no mistakes. Fall of Giants opens on the day of the coronation of George V. But actually the coronation occupies 1 sentence. And that opening chapter is actually about a young man, a boy actually, a 13-year-old boy. And it's his birthday, and today he begins work as an apprentice coal miner, and he goes down the pit. And so although I mentioned the grand event of the day, which is the coronation at Westminster Abbey, the scene is actually Billy Williams and his trepidation, his fear, his anxiety as he goes down into the coal mine for his first day of work. And that's what my grandfather did. My grandfather, on his 13th birthday, went down the pit and did his first day of work as an apprentice coal miner. Well, in Fall of Giants, Ethel Williams is probably the most important female character, and she is, I'm afraid, a character that has appeared in many previous Ken Follett novels under different names. She's an attractive, bright, sexy, determined woman. At the beginning of the story, she's a maid in a grand house and has one of the most menial jobs that you can get, but her destiny is elsewhere. And because she's feisty and because the world is changing, then actually the novel takes her from that position as a servant in a big house to the House of Commons, and she ends up as a member of Parliament. I enjoyed developing the character of Grigory, who is a Russian factory worker who becomes a commissar in the revolution and then a general in the Red Army. And he's a Bolshevik, and he's a convinced and sincere and passionate Bolshevik. And when we look back with the hindsight that we now possess, Bolshevism is a word almost as bad as Nazism. But it didn't look like that at the time, of course. And those early Bolshevists were idealistic. And it really interested me to think about why somebody like Grigory would think the way he thinks about politics and Russian society, and why he would be so passionately in favour of the things that people like Lenin and Trotsky and Stalin were saying. It takes quite a lot of imagination to put yourself in that position, and so it was a challenge which I enjoyed very much. Social divisions have always, all through history, have always been undermined by romance. And so for me, this is a way of bringing people from different levels of society together, and even though they may be hostile to one another in principle, they may be across a political divide, they're certainly across a social divide, they may nevertheless be very attracted to one another. And that, of course, messes everything up. And that's where drama comes from. Several very important scenes that take place in France in Fall of Giants. First of all, in August 1914, where I'm sorry to say the British Army did not distinguish itself quite as much as we might hope. And certainly the French had very reasonable complaints about the performance of their British allies. It's a great moment because, of course, Paris is threatened. And so I have a group of characters who are in Paris in August 1940, wondering what is going to happen. And of course, there was that famous moment, which I've included in Fall of Giants, where the military governor of Paris said he decided to send the entire garrison to the river, to the battlefield of the River Marne, because they decided that was where they would have to stop the invasion. And people said, you can't do that, we have no transport, we cannot get these. And so he sent them all in taxis. So it must have been a wonderful scene, and it's a great scene, I think. It's one of the big scenes in Fall of Giants, where one of our characters sees hundreds and hundreds of taxis taking soldiers out of Paris to the front. My subject is all of Western civilization. It's not from the point of view of one country. I've tried to see all the important events from international points of view. And the subject isn't even just a war. You know, it's not just about the First World War. The Russian Revolution takes up just as much of the story and is just as important. And of course, the two are linked, as everybody knows. So when I was thinking, you know, who should I read to see how they've tackled this challenge, I basically found that nobody's tackled this challenge. I'm on my own.